Oh, hello! Now, which holiday is sometimes known as Gay Christmas? A. Pride Month. B. Halloween. C. Christmas, but you're spending it with your chosen family. Or International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia. It's that last one, isn't it? Because let's be honest, LGBTQ plus people really need a day off just to say its name. Let alone explain why, yes, we still need a day to highlight how queer and trans people are fighting for our rights. You can be a real downer sometimes. Red Riding Hood. She's not wrong. Oh, whatever. The answer was Halloween anyway, and you're both uninvited to mine. Well, this is awkward. Hello, lovely people, and happy Halloween. I'm Jessica, my pronouns are she, her, and today I want to talk about how Halloween became Gay Christmas and explore why the holiday is so important to the queer community. And if that sounds fun, you should definitely hit the subscribe button below so you can stick around for queer culture, disability life, chronic illness chat, and videos where I take the history of fashion very seriously. If you look beyond trick-or-treating and beyond the religious or not so religious origins of the holiday, Halloween is a time where people are encouraged to dress up as someone else, an act of playful creativity that is really delightfully queer. Even before you get to the ways in which it allows us to blur the rigid lines of gender binary that are so strictly enforced for the rest of the year. For some reason, Halloween has become one of the few times where people seem to understand that what we wear, even makeup, doesn't have a gender. A concept that seems to be genuinely terrifying to some people who oppose LGBTQ+ rights. Before we get into this video, I want to give a quick content note that I'm going to be touching on some heavy topics in this video, including homophobia and violence against LGBTQ+ people, and discussions of queer and trans folks' relationships with their parents. Obviously, that's the really sticky part of the video. I'm going to avoid going into as much detail as possible, but please do take care of yourselves and add this video to your watch later list if you are not in the right headspace for this. Why am I still sending Christmas cards to elderly relatives who address mine as Miss, even though I've been married now for 8 years? Why indeed, and that's a video for another day. The origins of Halloween. First, let's talk about Halloween. Although today we might associate it with the slightly capitalistic American celebration, think costumes and candy and trick-or-treating. That's not how the festival started. In fact, Halloween, as we know it today, is a blend of different traditions and rituals layered on top of each other. The origins of Halloween lie in the ancient Celtic festival Samhain. Celebrated on the 1st of November, Samhain marked the divide between light summer months and the dark winter months. Samhain literally means summer's end in Irish and is the root of the word November. It's the root of the word November in both Irish and Scottish Gaelic. In Scottish Gaelic, Samhain is the word for Halloween. Although the earliest records we have of Samhain come from the 9th century CE, it's thought likely that the Celts' celebrations actually date back around 2,000 years. Unfortunately, this lack of records means we don't know exactly how the festival was celebrated. Absolutely was with appropriative costumes from other cultures, folktales, and traditional outfits. The Celts believed that Samhain was when the barrier between our world and the world of the spirits was at its thinnest. Gods, fairies and the spirits of people who had passed away were able to travel between the world. Villagers came together to light massive bonfires to ward off evil spirits, and some experts think that the hearth fires in every house would be put out and then relit from the embers of this bonfire. Some people have theorized that bats are one of the oldest symbols of Halloween because these bonfires would attract insects, which would in turn attract bats. I'm not a fan of bats. I grew up in a house with lots of bats. The tradition of dressing up for Halloween goes as far back as Samhain because people would dress up, often in animal skins, and disguise themselves to confuse the spirits wandering the world. There are some places that claim this would involve parents dressing young girls as boys and young boys as girls, but I wasn't able to find anywhere that explained how we know this. If you know a reliable source for this, please let me know in the comments. Sometimes it can be so difficult to find reliable sources on the internet. Just as difficult as keeping my personal information safe. Have you heard of people search sites? They're a huge data privacy problem. They're just creating detailed personal profiles on millions of Americans, and they're publishing them online for anyone to see. And that's why I'm delighted that Incogni are the sponsors of today's video. Welcome to the ad section. It's spooky how good I am at finding segues. You just need to create an account. You tell them whose personal data they'll be removing. They'll then request the removal of your data and deal with any objections from data brokers. Plus, Since many data brokers continue collecting your personal information even after they've removed it, Incognito will also automatically take care of any new records about you that pop up on data broker site. That's why the annual plan is such a great thing to have, because it just keeps coming back. Incogni are currently offering 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/Jessica with the code Jessica. So sign up today and avoid unnecessary jump scares. Boom. When the Romans arrived in Britain in the 1st century CE, they brought with them their own gods and traditions. It's possible that we get the bobbing for apples as a Halloween tradition from the festival of Pomona, which some scholars say was also celebrated on the 1st of November. Now, Pomona was the goddess of fruit trees and orchards, and her symbol was the apple. However, other scholars say that Pomona's festival was actually part of Virtuminalia, which was celebrated in August in honour of Pomona's husband, the god Virtuminus, and the idea that her festival would have lined up with Samhain comes from a mistranslation. Absolute killjoy. In the mid-9th century, Pope Gregory IV moved the Catholic festival All Saints' Day, which was originally observed on the 13th of May, to the 1st of November. The fact this coincided with Samhain was intentional. The Church wanted people to celebrate their feast days, rather than those older pagan festivals. Now, because All Saints' Day, or All Hallows' Day, as it was known in medieval England, honoured all the saints of the Church, both known and unknown, who have attained heaven, according to the Encyclopaedia Britannica, it allowed the Church to reframe existing rituals and just fold them in to Catholic celebrations. And at this point in history, the Church usually held vigils that were observed the evening and night before major feast days, giving us All Hallows Eve on the 31st of October. An article in The National by Hamish Macpherson explains that it was in the 16th century that the Scots word ean, which means evening or eve of, was combined with hallows to give us the term Halloween. There are many other traditions we associate with Halloween today, and there's also a lot of debate among experts about which parts of the holiday's history they draw from. But for us, it's time to talk about how Halloween has become so important to the LGBTQ+ community. The origins of gay Christmas. On November the 1st, 1907, the Pittsburgh Press published an article describing girls who had donned male attire being arrested the previous night. Wait, but that's not something you should be arrested for. The article says that the people arrested appeared at the central police station and took their medicine. And it's really uncomfortable to think about what that might have meant. We often talk about the uprising at Stonewall Inn in June 1969, where queer and trans people fought back against the police raiding the bar in New York City, as the beginning of the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement, which it was in many ways, but that can also kind of end up downplaying the existence and resistance of queer and trans people before that point in time. And the long history of LGBTQ+ people in other countries and cultures that the British Empire did our best to erase through colonialism. Of course, we are not great at fellow humaning. An aspect of the Stonewall riots that often is rarely mentioned is that the justification for the police raid and arrests were the laws against people wearing clothes that didn't correspond with the gender they were assigned at birth. It's baffling to me that this is part of our community's history, and yet there are some LGBTQ+ people who don't think that trans and non-binary people should be counted as part of the queer community. Fight these oppressors together! And those systems of oppression are determined to police to protect the gender binary. Writing for Freddie, a site dedicated to helping LGBTQ+ people access HIV prevention care, that also includes articles on queer culture and sexual health, Brad Tiller writes that in 1913, police once again arrested both women in men's clothes and 3 boys who were making appearances in feminine costumes. It wasn't until 1914 that Pittsburgh police announced they would not arrest women wearing men's clothing, unless of course they were disorderly or seen entering saloons. We don't know if the people mentioned in these articles were queer or trans, and they wouldn't necessarily have used these terms if they were. I have a video all about the history of the term queer here, so if you're interested in finding out more, you can watch that. But it's definitely the transgression of the gender norms that was being punished. In a piece for them, Oliver Hark explains that Halloween has historically provided a space where gender deviance wasn't just allowed, but celebrated. In the United States, where cities in every region of the country had laws prohibiting cross-dressing by the 1960s, the holiday provided a rare moment of freedom for queers. It wasn't until the mid-1980s that courts across the United States began moving to end the criminalization of cross-dressing. 1980s people, 1980s. Before these morality laws were overturned, Halloween offered LGBTQ+ people a chance to dress exactly how they wanted to without facing arrest or police violence. After all, they were just dressing up the same as everyone else was. And it worked. Eric Gonzaba, historian of LGBTQ+ culture and assistant professor of American Studies at California State University, tweeted an extract from a 1962 newsletter from the New York chapter of the Mattachine Society, which was a very early gay rights group. The newsletter informed readers that several members who'd been arrested for dressing in drag were later let go because it was Halloween. This freedom to defy laws that restricted gender expression meant that Halloween quickly became a gay high holiday. Haag writes that a lack of widespread queer press prior to the mid-20th century makes it hard to pinpoint the exact origins of queer Halloween celebrations, but as early as 1935, Alfred Finney, a gay black man in Chicago, was throwing glamorous Halloween balls on the city's south side. These events attracted hundreds of attendees. Of course, this freedom shouldn't have been restricted to one night a year. In contrast to the way some queer people could skirt homophobic legislation on Halloween, Gonzaba notes that the LAPD infamously raided the Black Cat just after midnight hit on New Year's in 1967, arresting 16 for gross indecency, likely for kissing a lover at midnight. 2 of those arrested had to register as sex offenders for the rest of their lives. Now, the term gay Christmas dates to the mid-20th century. Haag reports that according to historian Mark Stein, a professor at San Francisco State University, the term is thought to be an evolution of Bitches Christmas, a costume celebration that originated in Philadelphia in the 1950s and 60s. Queer partiers would follow drag performers from gay bar to gay bar, forming an unofficial Halloween parade. These celebrations in Philadelphia were shut down in the 1960s, coinciding with the city's LGBTQ+ community gaining greater press coverage. While it was a relatively underground activity, it could be quietly tolerated, but when it became much bigger and better known, it created the conditions for repression. Basically, LGBTQ+ people could get away with being visibly queer as long as we weren't too loud and proud about it. Haag notes also that these celebrations weren't shut down because they violated cross-dressing laws. Instead, business regulations were used to target bars holding drag contests. It's eerily similar to the anti-LGBTQ+ legislation banning drag today, which also relies on vaguely worded obscenity laws and language around protecting minors as a smokescreen for targeting trans people. However, the idea of gay Christmas had been established, and Halloween celebrations by and for LGBTQ+ folks popped up in major cities across the US and Canada in the 1970s and 80s. San Francisco's queer Halloween celebrations, for example, date back to the 70s. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, a San Francisco-based group of activist drag nuns, took over organising the celebration in the early 90s. The celebrations drew crowds to the streets of the Castro for costume contests, drag performance, costume contests. They came for the costume contests, drag performances, concerts, and at times even fireworks. But unfortunately, as with many queer celebrations, the spectre of violence hung over the event. I'm going to discuss violence against queer and trans people further for the next few minutes, so I will put a timestamp on screen now for where you can jump ahead to the next section if you need to. Even though Halloween offered LGBTQ+ people a brief respite from the police and state-sanctioned violence, we were still facing ridicule and abuse. In a piece for The Torontoist, Jamie Bradburn described a homophobic Halloween tradition that emerged in Canada in the 1960s, where bars on Yonge Street in Toronto began catering to LGBTQ+ patrons. Even if their heterosexual owners allowed police to nab clientele, Halloween offered a loophole, where for one night of a year it was fine to flout laws prohibiting men from dressing as women. At other times of the year, it wasn't unusual for men in drag to be hauled by police down to Cherry Beach and beaten up. This gave rise to costume balls on October 31st, which allowed participants to publicly display their sexuality and gender identity. Bradburn explains how crowds would gather to jeer at the drag costume ball attendees, and they would come prepared with eggs and ink to throw. His article includes first-hand accounts of what it felt like, taken from early issues of the gay journal, The Body Politic. Tony Metty recounted that, "I felt a sense of elation at this blatant display of homosexual culture. It was the first time I had ever seen gay people revealing themselves publicly as gays. When the crowd gasped at some particularly stunning drag queens, I felt a strange sense of pride in being a gay person. But then I would become aware of the jeers and contemptuous laughter, and another part of me would feel ashamed. I realised that the straights were laughing at me, the part of me the drag queens represented. While LGBTQ+ people might be permitted to be visible on Halloween, that visibility did not necessarily translate to acceptance. In another body politic piece, Hugh Brewster recorded that, as soon as the parade is over in front of St. Charles and the drag queens have gone inside, the mood of the crowd quickly becomes surly and vicious. Gangs of tough adolescents, egged on by their girlfriends, go looking for queers to beat up. The police have an increasingly difficult time controlling the crowds. Ink is thrown and faces get smashed. By 1971, Bradburn explains that police control was required to hold back a hostile crowd, estimated up to 8,000 people, and that according to the Toronto Star, St. Charles Tavern, where the costume ball was held, allowed in only admitted and obvious homosexuals. Are you too an admitted and obvious homosexual? I feel like I need that on a tote bag. By 1977, most attendees entered by the back door, rather than face being egged by the crowd on the street. This wasn't helped by media outlets hyping up the event. Bradburn writes that those heading downtown thought it was innocent fun. It's great because everyone's so friendly, right? A 21-year-old woman eager to toss eggs told the Globe and Mail in 1979. Except if you're a that's different. In 1980, concerted efforts by the local LGBTQ+ community meant that Halloween in Toronto looked a little different. For one, it occurred during a municipal election period and local candidates condemned the violence. Newspapers and radio stations received letters from both the police, who had arrested 130 people the previous year, and City Councillor Alan Sparrow, asking them not to discuss the event in advance. Metal barriers were erected and local shops were asked to reserve eggs for their regular customers. No eggs for you! You look straight. The few who did turn up looking to partake in the usual homophobic violence were disappointed. So they literally had to lock up the eggs to stop people throwing them at queers. And this is just one story about one drag ball. Long before we had Pride, LGBTQ+ people claimed Halloween as our night to celebrate our queerness, regardless of the horrific lengths that people went to tell us that our identities shouldn't be celebrated. The freedom of Halloween. Even as legislation governing what clothes people can wear based on their gender has been repealed, societal expectations still attempt to enforce unwritten rules about gender presentation. And there are still countries with strict laws about gendered clothing, as we saw this summer with the 2024 Olympics in Paris. That drew attention to how in France, women wearing hijabs are banned from participating in sport, which includes the athletes who are actually representing France in Olympic events. Today, at least in the Western world, it is seen as totally acceptable for women to wear trousers, but it's not that acceptable for men to wear skirts or dresses. Don't you have a video about boys wearing dresses? I do! Or high heels, even though high heels were originally worn by men. Don't you have? I do! So much homophobia seems to stem from the discomfort with gender expression that challenges the gender binary, whether that's butch lesbians or camp gay men. And of course, that societal policing of gender presentation only intensifies when it comes to trans and non-binary people, especially trans women and femmes. Because it's Halloween! Can't we just have fun with our costumes? Well, why did you go for a pretty, cutesy, girly costume and not something actually scary or transformative? Why didn't you take this opportunity to play around with the way you present? What barriers are you scared of pushing? I mean, it's red. It's a costume, right? It's a look. And although LGBTQ+ people obviously aren't a threat to cis-het folks, our mere existence and refusal to conform to cis-heteronormative societal norms is seen as frightening by those who have defined their lives by those norms. As Haag puts it in The Long History of How Halloween Became a Sacred Queer Holiday, Halloween is a time when the social order is disrupted, allowing queer people and other marginalised groups to safely express nonconformity in public without being perceived as a threat to the dominant social order. All this to say that, even in 2024, Halloween still offers LGBTQ+ people freedom to explore or play with gender and gender expression. Sure, while you might not be breaking laws or risking state-sanctioned violence if you do so on any other day of the year, you might still experience mockery or verbal abuse. As Deshaun Harrison, author of Belly of the Beast, The Politics of Anti-Fatness and Anti-Blackness, tweeted in 2019, to be visibly queer is to choose your happiness over your safety. Think about the scene in the Netflix show Sex Education, where Otis and Eric dress up to go and see Hedwig and the Angry Inch for Eric's birthday. It is a rare media example of a straight, cis man wearing a skirt and makeup, and it's not with the aim of the show making a transphobic joke. Yet, the scene also demonstrates that while Otis can get away with dressing up in drag for an evening, Eric, who is gay, faces much greater scrutiny about how he expresses himself, as well as verbal abuse and even violence for being visibly queer, especially in the show's first season. I don't say any of this to discourage people from experimenting with their gender presentation or living loudly as their authentic selves. It is our heteronormative transphobic society that needs to change, not LGBTQ+ people and other marginalised groups. On that note, let's take a brief interlude to discuss some ideas for queer and trans Halloween costumes. If you're stuck for inspiration and need some last-minute costume ideas, don't worry. There are numerous LGBTQ+ figures, both real and fictional, that you could dress as for Halloween. Freddie Mercury's outfit from when Queen performed at Live Aid in 1985 is an iconic look. Or, with a blue jumpsuit, you could be Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, and the only LGBTQ+ astronaut we know about, though this was only made public after her death in 2012. Sappho, the Greek poet famous for her romantic poetry about women, and she literally gave us the term lesbian. She's pretty great. She would make a great, wonderful, good costume if you have a white dress or a sheet. It's a toga. I was never Sappho, but I did dress up as a Roman goddess for at least one Halloween. With a vintagey dress and a copy of A Room of One's Own or Orlando, you could be Virginia Woolf. Or if you have more time to put a costume together, might I suggest dressing up as a queer icon and WNBA Team New York Liberty's mascot, Ellie the Elephant. WNBA is the Women's National Basketball Association, just in case, like me, you aren't a sports gay. You could also take the opportunity to pay homage to one of the many excellent TV shows with LGBTQ+ characters that weren't renewed for further series, but definitely should have been, like A League of Their Own, Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, or First Kill. And there are many incredible queer couples you could dress up as if you want to wear matching costumes with a partner or a friend. What about confirmed girlfriends, Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy? Or we can all see they're in love even if it takes them forever to admit it. Velma and Daphne from Scooby-Doo, yeah. You just need some purple and orange. Or what about Morticia and Gomez from the Addams Family? Although you might not think of them as a queer couple, they definitely have big bi for bi energy. Or maybe trans femme and trans mask couple energy. Oh, I see it. Maybe you could be Wednesday Addams and Enid Sinclair, with one of you dressed as goth and the others brightly coloured. Very cute. Oh, what about going as the golden retriever girlfriend / black cat girlfriend relationship dynamic that many discussions were inspired of this year, particularly like the one I Kissed a Girl. I'm expecting literal black cats and golden retrievers. And even though Halloween can be a great time to play with gender, it is totally valid if you want your costume to affirm your identity. There are plenty of gender-neutral costume possibilities. Vampires, monsters, zombies, ghosts, even pumpkins don't have a gender. Why are we giving pumpkins genders? Is that normal? You're free from the confines of the gender binary. Just dress as a pumpkin. Though, contrary to what some transphobes have people believe, your gender can't necessarily be determined just from your bones. We're also finally getting some representation of non-binary and genderqueer characters in media, although I'm loath to give, Disney that much credit when it comes to LGBTQ+ representation. Lake Ripple in Elemental, which was released in 2023, is said to be Disney's first ever non-binary character, and they are voiced by non-binary voice actor Kai Ava Hauser, so you could even go as a concept. One of the last-minute costume ideas for procrastinating queers that Evelyn Bowers suggested in an article for them is to bring a little hand mirror with you and just stare into it all night long. Your gay pride, baby! And if you don't fancy dressing up as a public or historical figure or fictional character, you can just always be queer, someone else up. Why not? Be a queer Superman. Be trans Princess Merida. Be agender, asexual Joe March. Sheila from The Little Mermaid, definitely queer-coded. Yes, it has been confirmed that the character was inspired by American actor and drag queen Divine. You get the idea. It's Halloween. There are no rules. Remember, being gay means that you're already very, very scary to those who see queerness as a threat. Nothing's more threatening to bigots than people who are unafraid to be themselves, so just dress as you. The confines of Christmas. Okay, now we've explored why Halloween is such an important celebration for the LGBTQ+ community, it's time to address how other aspects of it became a gay Christmas. And namely, Christmas itself isn't always the most fun time of year for LGBTQ+ people. As Canadian screenwriter and journalist J.P. Larroquette put it in an article for Extra, let's face it, the Yuletide is most definitely not gay, despite what Judy Garland sang all those years ago. While Christmas is ostensibly a religious holiday, it's not just celebrated just by Christians. It has become a cultural holiday as much as a religious one, at least in the UK. In a piece for The Guardian, journalist Owen Jones writes that in an increasingly diverse and secular Britain, the festive period has become a celebration of family for most of us. And for LGBTQ+ people, family can be complicated. Regardless of how realistic a representation it is of how people actually spend the holidays, Christmas is synonymous with just returning home to our families of origin. Larroquette writes that the holiday season can feel like you're supposed to make yourself fit into a story that's been going on for generations. It's ingrained in all of our cultural institutions, and one that likely never had any queer people in it because they weren't welcome at the table. Many Christmas traditions, at least in the UK, are based around the heterosexual nuclear family. Many queer and trans people feel like they have to hide parts of themselves in order to get through the holiday. With mainstream queer acceptance a fairly recent phenomenon, you're often required to frame yourself and your relationship in terms that are palatable and immediately relatable to straight people. Oh, don't worry folks, we're just like you. This form of acceptance is as much a curse as it is a blessing, as it requires a lot of role play. None of this is to say that there aren't queer and trans people who have incredibly supportive families and who feel comfortable being their authentic selves at home. There are plenty of LGBTQ+ people who love Christmas. I love Christmas. Christmas can involve spending time around people who don't accept or aren't comfortable with your queerness. Writing for Gay Times about their anxiety ahead of their first Christmas with an extended family since realising they were genderqueer, Carden Cappy explains that I'm also dreading hearing my dead name aloud. Similarly to coming out, it just causes me so much discomfort to correct people when they do that. And what if people start questioning me or even challenging my identity? I always tell myself that it's not my problem if people don't accept who I am, but it still hurts. And even if your immediate family is accepting, going home for Christmas can still involve dealing with relatives who are less understanding and dodging insensitive questions from old acquaintances or neighbours. Larroquette explains that you feel forced to inhabit an outdated version of yourself that you've outgrown. It's a lot like going back to your childhood closet and shoving yourself into that old scratchy sweater. Chances are it doesn't fit anymore and you hate the way you look in it. It's just not you anymore. Oh, it can be exhausting and alienating to feel like you're not able or safe to be yourself. As Larroquette continues, I wonder how much of that acceptance is conditional, or if perhaps a peck on the cheek holding hands could shift me out of favour, or make someone uncomfortable, or make a space that had otherwise been so welcoming become hostile. Then there are the LGBTQ+ people who aren't welcome at home for Christmas, even if they're willing to tone down their identity or for the comfort of straight cisgender family members. Almost a quarter of young homeless people aged 16 to 25 identify as being LGBTQ+, according to the charity AKT, who are dedicated to supporting homeless young LGBTQ+ people. Being estranged from your family of origin can be even more painful at a time of year when it feels like family is emphasised above everything else. I want to make it clear that no one should pressure you to change or hide yourself to fit in with their idea of a perfect heteronormative family Christmas. Automatically fetishising family rather than considering each unit on its own merits is a mistake. Parents do not always know what is best for their children. Being unable to be your authentic self amongst blood relatives can exact a profound human toll, and non-biological queer families are often there to pick up the resulting emotional pieces. Of course, people who love us can still make mistakes when it comes to new pronouns or names. While that's understandable, if you've known someone a long time, it can take some time to adjust. It can still really hurt. If you're nervous about messing up someone's name or pronouns, it can be really helpful to practice with a family member or a friend, not the person whose name or pronouns you're still trying to get used to, obviously. No, just someone else. The more you use someone's name and pronouns, the more it will become instinctive. In comparison to a holiday that can leave LGBTQ+ people feeling isolated from our community and support network and foster smiles through comments that range from slightly homophobic to downright bigoted, it's easy to see why many of us prefer Halloween. A holiday without stifling expectations of how celebrations should look, one that actually can make it easier for queer and trans people to be ourselves rather than conform to heteronormative societal expectations. Sign me up. Mask bans are scarier than Halloween. There's one more aspect of Halloween that I wanted to talk about, and for this one I'm going to take off my lesbian hat and put on my disabled and chronically ill hat. That's a joke. I'm always wearing both hats. It can be exhausting, and it makes putting outfits together very challenging. Halloween is a time of year where people often wear masks as part of their costumes, so I wanted to address the series of mask bans that are being introduced and passed in the US at the moment. Whilst we're no longer in COVID lockdown, obviously, COVID is by no means over. An article at NBC News by reporter Marquise Francis in July 2024 reports that while COVID-19 is no longer considered a public health crisis, infections are on the rise in at least 38 states, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And masks, experts say, are a crucial way to lower the risk of transmitting the virus. Masks for me are a very sticky thing. As someone who lip reads, I kind of require to see people's lips to be able to understand what they are saying. My wife was therefore exempt from wearing a mask when with me in public so that she could communicate what other people were saying to me because I couldn't understand what they were saying. So she would tell me what they had said. Anyway, the introduction of mask bans are incredibly scary, especially to disabled and immunocompromised people. Catherine McFarlane, the director of the Disability Law and Policy Program at Syracuse University of Law, considers herself high risk due to her disability and questions how a mask ban takes into account the safety of people like her with health vulnerabilities. She also doubts that increasing high-stress interactions with the police will yield positive results and feels it's unfair to put the burden on immunocompromised people to share health concerns that are not visible to the naked eye. That doesn't lend itself well to a safe interaction. While lots of people have stopped masking now that it's no longer recommended by government health guidelines, many disabled and immunocompromised folks and our allies have continued to wear masks. Despite this, as journalist Fenit Nirupilli puts it for the Washington Post, state legislators and law enforcement are reinstating dormant laws that criminalize mask wearing to penalize pro-Palestinian protesters who can steal their faces. It's a case of politics. And let's be honest, racist systems of oppression taking precedence over public health, and a confirmation that our liberation is inherently connected to each other. As Dr. Lucky Tran, a science communicator and organiser with COVID Advocacy New York, tweeted in September, "It is wild that politicians are trying to push forward mask bans just because they hate protesters and don't care if they throw higher risk and immunocompromised people under the bus while they try to ineffectively squash protests." In response to replies pointing out that the legislation includes health exceptions, they added that health exceptions don't work. They increase racial profiling, often still require mask removals, and violate people's privacy rights. Why do we have to freaking go around telling everyone about our personal medical information just so we can be treated like human beings? Yep, even people wearing masks for health reasons can still be asked to take them off at times. Francis notes that in September, GOP lawmakers in North Carolina overrode a veto by the state's Democratic governor to ban mask wearing in public. As part of the new law, people may wear medical masks in public to prevent the spread of illness, but officers and property owners then can ask people to remove their masks to verify their identity, or I guess, whenever they want. These health exemptions also ignore the reality of disability. It's not only people who are elderly or visibly disabled who are at high risk. It's also the people around them who are protecting the people who are high risk. And we know that people with invisible disabilities like chronic pain or autoimmune disorders already face harassment for using accessibility tools when they appear healthy. People who continue to wear masks are already facing abuse. Nirupil reports that the day after the North Carolina House of Representatives passed its anti-masking bill in June, Shari Stewart said a man confronted her for wearing a surgical mask when she walked into an auto service station in the Raleigh area to get an oil change. After she tried to explain that she has stage 4 breast cancer and a weakened immune system, Stewart said the man called her an effing liberal and insisted masks were now illegal. Yes, because cancer cares so much about your politics. Neuropil's article also quotes Adam Goldstein, a medical professor at the University of North Carolina, who claims that people wearing masks while protesting are doing so selectively to hide their identity. If you're at high risk, you probably shouldn't do high-risk activities like congregating in large public groups. Disabled people should be allowed to show up to protest for our rights and for collective liberation just as much as anyone else. In fact, everyone should be able to do that whilst wearing a mask or taking other COVID-related precautions or any health-related precautions or any health precautions they bloody well want to. The first of this spate of mask bans to be signed into law was in Nassau County in the New York State on the 6th of August. In a piece for The Guardian, writer and presenter Adam Gabbett explains that the Mask Transparency Act states that it shall not apply to facial coverings worn to protect the health or safety of the wearer for religious or cultural purposes or for the peaceful celebration of a holiday or similar religious or cultural event for which the wearing of masks or facial coverings are customarily worn. Which makes it sound like wearing a Halloween mask would be fine, right? Not necessarily. Gabbett continues that an informational bulletin published by the New York Civil Liberties Union about the new legislation noted that the language of the county's ban is vague and does not differentiate between medical masks like N95s or KN95s and surgical masks and other types of masks or facial coverings, including niqabs, burqas, wrapping a scarf or bandana around your face, and costume masks. Obviously the stakes are a lot higher than Halloween masks. In a statement on the Nassau County mask ban, New York State Senator Yuan Chu pointed out that wearing masks is a common practice in many Asian cultures and that mask bans may lead to anti-Asian hate and discrimination. These mask bans will disproportionately impact disabled people and people of colour, especially those who exist at the intersection of multiple marginalised identities. And why are we leaving it to police to determine who counts as disabled enough to wear a mask in public, which is far scarier, at least to me, than any ghosts or Halloween monsters. Yes, dress as the police this Halloween. Go for it. Which is why it's important to vote for people who have the best interests of the whole community in mind. Make sure you're registered to vote and check you haven't been bumped off your registration and encourage like-minded family and friends to do so. And for those of you not about to have an election, yell at your officials politely in writing. In conclusion, thank you for joining me on this investigation into why Halloween is so queer. Sorry I got shouty at you. I hope you all have a wonderful gay Christmas this year, no matter how you're going to be celebrating. I hope all of you have a space where you're able to explore your gender presentation or queerness through your Halloween costume if you want to. It has been an incredibly hard year for LGBTQ+ youth in particular, as evidenced by the fact that as of the 5th of September 2024, the ACLU is tracking 530 anti-LGBTQ+ bills in the US, many of them targeting the rights of young trans and non-binary people. While Halloween is a brilliant time for queer people to show up as their authentic selves, we should all get to live in a world where it is safe to be who we are all year round. Worth noting that while that massive number is terrifying, the majority of those bills have been defeated and have not passed. It's important that we continue to show up for our community and for queer and trans youth. Panicking at the overwhelming amount of anti-LGBTQ+ legislation doesn't help any of us. On a lighter note, are you planning to dress up this year? I would love it if you'd leave me a comment and let me know about your costume plans. If you were looking for some inspiration for queer and or disabled historical figures, you could definitely check out my series of historical profiles. Alternatively, you might enjoy the video I made for Halloween last year, which was all about the ugly laws and disabled villains in media. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video. They're currently offering 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/Jessica with the code Jessica. And thank you for clicking on the link. Each and every one of them helps support this channel. I also want to say a huge thank you to the members of my Kellgren-Fozard club. If you would like to become a member of the KF club, you can join right here on YouTube by clicking the button down below. Clubbies, which is what we call our members, get access to exclusive monthly behind the scenes videos, a birthday shout out in your birthday month, and my little face after your name in the comments section. I have been making these behind the scenes videos for 6 years now, which means there is a playlist of over 70 bonus monthly vlogs for you to enjoy if you join today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.